but possible.
I gotta get behind you.
It's
Sorry.
possible.
It's going to heat up in here fast. It got hot in here yesterday. The day before yesterday.
How are you, Bill? Fancy seeing you here. One more time. How are you doing? Come sit down.
I've only seen you by passing. I've seen you in an elevator as it opened.
Tried not to be here much. Jeff's sick today. He's got the stomach bug. At least he said he had the stomach bug. He may just be tired of the drum of the phone.
He may be in Philadelphia going through the ticker tape parade. You'll have to look on the NFL channel to see if he's, kind of like Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Right. Yeah. Is Patrick here?
I've been seeing him up here this afternoon.
Okay.
I saw him earlier today.
Yeah. I need him to say he supports House Bill 97. Comes around.
What is that one?
You just can't go past where that man is there.
You don't
We
want
stay out of each
Eventually we're going to stop
That's a good
coming
thing.
in the room.
That's a good thing. Which one? No. No, the only issue that just is there's an 87 and 647. Patrick was fine with both of them. But he didn't spell it to 97. So 97. 97 says motion for the subcommittee.
Second.
But 647 just disappears. So I hope he got them combined.
We'll roll.
What's that?
No, sir.
I don't eat as much as people think.
I eat raw stuff. That's not ridiculous.
Forgive me, I had papers covering up my microphone. We're going to call Subcommittee 1 General Office order. We have 5 bills to be heard today. All the bills are similar in scope. And so what the subcommittee plans to do is we're going to hear from all the chief patrons or all the patrons of the legislation one at a time. And of course at that time they'll be able to take questions from the members. And then after they present all 5 of the bills, we're going to plan to take public comment, both obviously pro and con, and then the committee will run through it one at a time on the on the proposed legislation. So again, that's how we're going to go. And so anyway, the first bill we have up today is Mr. Levine. Take your time, sir, but I just want to let you know you're in the back of the box. I'll just leave all my stuff in the middle of the floor. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. You have House Bill 401.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members committee. See my side up here, but I assume we'll get down here soon enough. House Bill 401 is a very important bill. This is a bill that, in essence, I've introduced a couple of times now. It's a non-discrimination bill. That's what the bill does. To paraphrase Martin Luther King Jr., you should be judged by the content of your character and not by the color of your skin. And it's true in race, it's true in color, it's true in religion, national origin. It's also certainly true with regards to sexual orientation or gender identity. The bill prohibits discrimination in employment, public housing, public contracting, apprenticeship programs, housing, banking, and insurance. It's a comprehensive bill. It's one that we hope we never have to come back for. The essence of this bill is whether or not this discrimination should be lawful. And I think, as we've learned from the civil rights movement, that once you prohibit discrimination, it allows people to fully participate in the public sphere, to get jobs, to live places. We should be judging employees based on whether they're good employees. Allow the good ones, fire the bad ones. Their sexual orientation is irrelevant to how well they do their job. We should be allowing people to live in places or not live in places. Do they pay their rent? Are they good tenants? Should they be able to buy? These again are not based on their gender identity, but whether or not they should be able to buy. We have been slowly taking discrimination out of the public sphere. It's time that we close it. And let me just say this, you're going to hear, I'm sure, from a number of people who've been discriminated against. As an openly gay man, I know hundreds of these stories I've heard through my life. People who were not given a job because they're gay. People who were kicked out of a house because of their gender identity. And they're really very powerful stories. They're very painful stories. And I know every one of you here. I think y'all are fair-minded people. And I can't imagine any of you discriminating against someone based on something, a characteristic. You should, again, hire people based on how good a job they do. Let people live where they want to live and not base it on these things. It's a fundamental fairness bill. You're going to be hearing a lot of stories, I'm sure, from a lot of people, but I do want to plead with the committee. This is an idea, I think, whose time has come. I think it's all over across the country. I think it's bipartisan. I think it's young and old, particularly though young people, the new generations, they don't have a problem with someone's sexual orientation or gender identity. They say live and let live, and I truly hope it will be, this committee will take an historic step and pass this bill out of subcommittee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate Levine. This time I'd like to ask any of the members have questions for the patron. Thank you, Delegate Levine. Let me see. The next bill we're going to have up is Delegate Guzman.
Is it on the same issue? Because I know we have people who want to testify in favor of the bill.
We're going to take all of the public comment all at one. Delegate Guzman's not here.
I assume she'll make it maybe during the public comment. Maybe she'll.
Okay, we'll just hold it just out. I believe I saw Senator Evans. Very good. Good to see you, Senator.
Great to see you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I feel like it's, as Yogi Berra said, deja vu all over again. Once again, we're here in Richmond, and once again, we have a non-discrimination in public employment bill before the members of this subcommittee. Every year, it gets more and more universally accepted, as Levine was saying, to have non-discrimination policies. And this is the simplest and most basic and ought to be the least controversial of any of these bills that you hear. Right now, for the last 4 out of the last 5 governors, we've had a non-discrimination policy in state hiring, and the sky has not fallen. The Commonwealth has not been subject to a raft of litigation. All it's done is give our state employees some dignity, some certainty, and also it sets a positive tone for our Commonwealth. We know that Fortune 500 companies are that they have these policies, and further, we know that each of the 19 Fortune 500 companies in Virginia have a policy against discriminating against sexual orientation or gender identity. All qualified Virginians should be treated fairly and equally, particularly as SB 202 covers in matters of employment. It, as I said, brings into the code the executive order of the previous governors, including the current governor. I always find people who are surprised that the other categories are not even included in the code as well, such as veterans, pregnancy, national origin, race, religion, color, childbirth-related medical conditions, disability, and so forth in the code. It's time, and I hope that you'll have a full and fair discussion. And a few years ago, you sent this off to the Code Commission, for some reason feeling that you needed to ask the Code Commission if it was appropriate. And the Code Commission came back and told you all that it was your decision, the policies of the Commonwealth of Virginia. The Senate voted a few weeks ago on a vote of 29 to 10 for this policy. And we had all kinds of senators, every Democrat, but other Republicans. We had Republicans from Augusta to Chesapeake to here to every region of the Commonwealth. And I hope it's time that we'll catch up and move into this century. And I really look forward to your questions. I hope if you can't support this, that you'll at least take the time to ask the questions that you have trouble with rather than avoid this this common sense policy. Thank you.
Thank you, City Member. Do any of the members have a question of the pager?
I do. Mr. Chairman,
Doug,
I noticed you've added the status of veteran. Do we have an example of a veteran who's been turned down of a job status because of their veteran status?
Thank you for asking that, because I think it's important. It's not whether anyone was turned down for a job. It's whether or not we want to protect all people. We don't want someone because they deploy, or a veteran, I should say, someone stigmatized because they are a veteran. But we should protect every Virginian. The point of this bill is I want every Virginian who works for state or local government to be charged solely on the basis of their qualification and what they bring to the job, veteran or not.
Thank you, Senator. Have any other questions for the pager?
Yeah, thank you very much. Senator Evans, good afternoon. Wanted to see if you could describe what the current status of federal law is, particularly any case law that may be before the Supreme Court or in courts of appeals across the nation. Do we have anything settled as it relates to these various subjects?
No, I think as Chairman of the larger committee knows, the Supreme Court, to my knowledge, has never ruled on this particular topic because there's no statute. Congress has not passed it. But if you polled most Americans, they would think that it has passed. It passed, I think it was the U.S. Senate once, but not the House of Representatives. Although there's a huge number of Republicans and Democrats at the federal level on record in support of these protections. Think about it this way. If you were gay or lesbian, should you be allowed to serve in this body? Think about it that way.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions?
I guess it means we're going to pass the bill, so I thank you for that.
Thank you, Senator. We're going to just break this slightly from the agenda, and we have had a request, Delegate Guzman, to just strike the bill at the request of the patron. So I will entertain a motion. Second. All those in case you vote electronic voting machine. Close polls. The bill is stricken 7-0. Moving right along, we have Delegate Simon and Senator Waxman. We have, I think, identical bills.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Parliamentary inquiry. I see the delegate pieces here, and I just want to make sure I understand. So the way we do subcommittees, you sort of sit ex officio, but you wouldn't vote unless somebody on your side was missing. Is that right?
That is accurate, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Simon knows the rules very well.
Absolutely, he is very good for the rules.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would note that Delegate Ward was excused today when we met at the floor, for excused absence. And I would notice that, I know you can't sub for her, but you've got Delegate Jones here sitting at the end of the dais. And I know that as chairman of the committee, I think you have the right to appoint subcommittee members. Maybe you could appoint an emergency substitution there for Delegate Ward.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Simon, I appreciate the gentleman's creativity. I know that my actions would also bind or potentially bind other committees and set precedent, so I'll decline to do so.
Figure it was worth a shot, Mr. Chairman. Maybe not. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we are here for my House bill is 300, which is for this bill would add sexual orientation and gender identity to the list of protected classes under Virginia's Fair Housing.
Now, hold it just a second.
I'm sorry, I lied. It's House Bill 1547.
1547. Thank you.
It was House Bill 1547 last time I did it, and so we didn't update the heading on my. We didn't update the heading on my talking points. You see, I have the same talking points because I've introduced this bill. I think this will be my 5th session. It'll be the 4th time I've introduced the bill to you. So I think we're making progress. So what this bill does simply is add sexual orientation and gender identity to the list of protected classes under Virginia's Fair Housing Statute. I would note that the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics some years ago added gender identity and sexual orientation to their list of protected classes so that if someone were to discriminate on that basis, a realtor who is a member of the Realtor Association, they'd be subject to discipline under the Code of Ethics. So in some ways, by not having this as part of our Fair Housing Statute, we actually disadvantage members of the Realtor Association by actually holding them to a different standard, giving folks that are discriminated against by a realtor a different cause of action. It's not available to licensees that don't join the Realtor Association. So I don't think that that's a good policy. The policy we ought to be following there as far as a realtor. And in fact, this is one of those bills that 5 years ago, when I first introduced to the Realtor Association opposed, but they've since come around in response to the change in their membership, and they've decided this is something that they want to embrace. And they, in fact, I think will be speaking in support of this bill when you guys decide to take public comment on this. Some of the objections I've heard in the past, is this in fact a problem? Has anybody ever been discriminated against on the basis of their sexual orientation? So a group called Housing Opportunities Made Equal did a study after hearing those questions, and they found that in fact there is discrimination that happens. They sent some testers out, they did some test cases. They found that folks that identified themselves as a same-sex couple shopping for a house experienced discrimination at higher rates than people that identified themselves as a traditional married couple. So we know that it's actually a problem. It does happen. We haven't had lots of complaints about it because it's not actionable yet. So you complain about something that's not very good conduct of Virginia's Fair Housing Statute. You all, I heard today on the floor, are the party of millennials. You care very much about millennials and how we tax Uber and Netflix and all those things. I will tell you that polling shows that this is actually an issue that's really sort of a non-issue for most millennial voters. They don't understand what the big deal is anymore. They expect that by now we ought to be extending these sorts of protections to the LGBT community. They don't think that same-sex marriage is a big deal. They think that this is something that, again, frankly, I think many millennials are surprised we don't offer this protection to members of the LGBT community. I teach this fair housing in my profession. My realtors are surprised, again, that it's not covered under Virginia's code. It is in D.C., it is in Maryland, so my folks that do business in multiple jurisdictions have to follow a different set of rules in different places, so this will make us consistent with what a lot of the country is doing. It's the right thing to do, members. It is absolutely the right thing to do for Virginia. You know, we are bidding right now. One of a number of companies that's bidding for Amazon's second headquarters. We just landed in Nestle. We have an opportunity here to demonstrate to the country and the world that Virginia is a place that is open to all of our talented workers and employees, and we don't discriminate against people on their color, their religion, their race, their national origin, or who they choose to love and marry. I think it's important that we use this opportunity, this hearing, to send a message that Virginia is open for business, it's open to all, and that we are a company that, rather a state that is ready to move to the 21st century and attract this 21st century businesses. So I thank you for
Senator Waxman, we have Senate Bill 423.
Senate Bill 423. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee. Y'all have a very interesting way of doing things over here on this side of the Capitol. But I think Delegate Simon has addressed a lot of the issues with this bill. But it's important to remember who this does not apply to. Okay, it
just say this, we have another subcommittee after this, and then the full committee has to meet. So please, in the interest of time, if it'd be nice if you know, there's maybe people didn't all get up and say the same thing, and we'll just try to move it along as quickly as possible, and I appreciate that. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Chairman James Parrish for the quality of and I respect that, but I do think we have a lot of people who came in the last minute when this committee was scheduled yesterday. So if you were in support of these 4 bills, please stand while I make this statement. So Chairman, members of the committee, what is taking place today is an alarming effort to vote down basic fairness legislation that has broad support. We have a committee hastily scheduled by leadership for the sole purpose of stopping legislation that most of the General Assembly agrees with. Many of you know that Equality Virginia values its pragmatic reputation, and our approach involves trying to find consensus from both parties to pass common sense legislation. On this legislation, we have found consensus, and it's common sense. And that's because I don't think any of the delegates here today would be willing to argue that the government, that Virginia, should be able to discriminate against gay and transgender Virginians. Which is why this process, and the vote you've been instructed to take, is all the more painful for me. I know many of you, and I know how you actually feel about these issues. You've told me privately, or I've heard from one of your friends, family members, or business partners. So I can't fathom how you can look at me today and take a vote that would allow me to be fired from a government job, or denied a home. So yes, this process is personal, and we will not let the procedural minutia distract Virginians from what Speaker Cox, Delegate Hugo, and Delegate Gilbert are doing today. If you vote to pass by, you are endorsing the firing of the state employees simply because of who they are. If you vote to pass by, you are enabling those who would deny your constituents a home because of who they are. How will you explain this vote? Every one of you has gay or transgender family members, friends, or constituents who you promised to represent. There's no good explanation here because Virginians have already moved on. While the majority of members of this committee have been given orders to use procedural tools to kill this bipartisan legislation, you're only delaying the inevitable on an issue that's already been decided. It's been decided by our statewide elections since 2009 when only people who support LGBT people have won. It's been decided by Republican voters, by a bipartisan supermajority in the Senate, and by the business community. It has been decided in the hearts of Virginians, and our supporters will only continue to grow. Equality Virginia has always found a way to work with both Democrats and Republicans. But it is impossible to find common ground in the General Assembly when the leadership of the House is so afraid of a floor vote that they will move procedural mountains to satisfy the whims of a tiny faction. What are Speaker Cox, Delegate Hugo, and Delegate Gilbert afraid of? Why have they instructed you to kill these bills today? Thank you.
Thank you. Can you identify yourself, please?
Yes. My name is Carol Shaw. My wife, Mary Towney, and I were plaintiffs in the Bostic case that went to the Supreme Court and led to marriage for same-sex families in Virginia. I'm speaking in support of these bills for my family, for my friends, for my neighbors, and for my community, because this is common sense legislation. The majority of Virginians across Virginia, across both parties, support these protections. When these bills were passed by bipartisan support, these protections increase the desirability of Virginia for businesses to come here and to make Virginia a more fair place. All of Virginia is watching all of you today. You have the choice to be on the right side of history. You have the choice to truly represent all of Virginia's citizens. These bills move us ever closer to truly embodying our great motto. I hope that all of you will support these common sense bills and finally make Virginia a place for lovers of equality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am, can you identify yourself, please?
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Mary Rose Vaughn on behalf of the Virginia Fair Housing Office at the Department of Professional and Occupational Regulation, the administration strongly supports this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you identify yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Sarah Wilson. I'm the agency head for the Virginia Department of Human Resource Management, and the administration strongly supports the fair and non-discriminatory bills.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. My name is Brian Koziel. I'm the director
discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity under the Virginia Fair Housing Law. According to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, 22 other states offer these protections, including our neighbors in Maryland and the District of Columbia. These protections are sorely needed in Virginia. In 2014 and 2015, Home conducted a research project that included match paired email tests in the rental markets in Richmond, Hampton Roads, and Northern Virginia. In 44% of these comparable tests, those tests in which the same rental agent responded to both testers, same-sex couples were treated worse than different-sex couples. For example, a straight couple was offered an appointment, but the gay couple was not. Gay couple was told about a special, a gay couple was not told about a special, the straight couple was told about. And the straight couple was encouraged to apply online, while the gay couple was not. Our look at this early part of the rental process uncovered differences that suggest larger differences could occur later in the process or even during tenancy. An argument against this bill that you likely hear is that since there are few, if any, complaints on record, that it's not a problem. This argument is hollow. People know they have no recourse. People know that they are not protected. People know that there's nothing they can do. This leads to a culture of silence that obscures the problem. There's a growing body of research conducted here in Virginia as well as across the country that shows that housing discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity is widespread. When someone experiences housing discrimination, they suffer both economic and emotional harm. It can lead to longer and more expensive housing searches, homelessness, and ongoing emotional trauma. To be denied a basic necessity because of who you are is something that nobody should have to experience. Victims of discrimination deserve a way to hold accountable those who have caused them harm. One's sexual orientation or gender identity is completely irrelevant when it comes to paying the rent or being a good neighbor. People should be able to seek and qualify for the housing of their choice, not have their options unfairly limited by stereotypes and prejudice. In closing, I urge you to support legislation that will make Virginia a place where everyone's right to housing is protected, because who you love or how you identify should not limit where you can live. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Claire Guthrie-Gastanaga on behalf of the ACLU of Virginia and its 42,000 members. We strongly support all of this legislation, but I wanted to bring a personal perspective to at least one aspect to it. When you think about these issues, I bet you're not thinking about the military. And I bet you're not thinking about what this means when the military starts to make decisions about things like aircraft carriers and Brock and all of the rest of that. But you should be. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when my dad was a 4-star general, when the military in the Washington area declared certain apartment complexes off limits because they were continuing to discriminate against black people when it came to rentals. And it is not beyond the possibility that commanders down at the bases in Hampton Roads and elsewhere in Virginia may be asked by the people in their commands to begin to start to do something about discrimination by declaring different housing units and different housing apartment complexes in different places that are discriminating off limits to all military personnel. But you're sending a message to all Virginians, and you're sending a message particularly to military members and their families who live here, that this is not a welcoming place, that this is not an inclusive place, and this is not a good place for the military to be located in a circumstance in which its members cannot expect not to be discriminated against in the public sphere, whether it's public accommodations or housing or job opportunities for their spouses. So I would strongly encourage you to support this legislation. It's the right thing to do. And to answer one question that someone asked about the federal law, let's be clear. Our state statute imports automatically any federal civil rights law that's passed. So you're going to confront this one way or another one day, with whether you like to or not, because If the federal law changes, so will our state statute. But you shouldn't be waiting for that time. You should be leading the Commonwealth toward inclusion and opportunity and voting in favor of these bills. Thank you.
Thank you, and I want to ask the other folks who will speak against to kind of maybe just kind of shorten their comments a little bit because we want to allow the other side a chance to speak. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Sir. Your name is, can you identify yourself, please?
My name is Robert Slavis. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and subcommittee. 37 years ago, my partner and I had to lie on a loan application in order to buy our home. I am also a veteran. I ask you to consider the plight of three types of people. One might be a gay teenager who was kicked out of his home because of his sexual identity. Today, that teenager could be denied entry into a public shelter. The only recourse that individual has is living on the streets and everything that he might experience on the streets. I ask you to consider the plight, like the previous speaker said, about a lesbian sailor or a gay Marine or transgender airman who experience zero discrepancy while they're living on base. Yet when they choose to live off base, can be denied rental of an apartment, a loan for a home, or the ability to buy a home. These are people who risk their lives in order to protect your way of life, to protect your ability to believe what you believe. And you would deny them the basic right of housing if you do not allow them, if you do not remove this level of discrimination from housing. The last set of people I ask you to consider are an elderly gay couple. Consider people who are in their 80s, who've been committed their entire lives, 87 years old, could be denied the ability to move into a retirement community or a nursing home that they may need for their health as a result of this legislation. I ask you to look in your hearts. I ask you to consider that this is 2018 and this type of discrimination just doesn't make sense anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Can you identify yourself, please?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Michael Forehand with the Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce, also speaking on behalf of the Northern Virginia Technology Council. Our organization supported the Open Commonwealth, and we are sending in support of Senate Bill 202, which makes Senator Adams bill. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
Yourself, sir.
Yes, sir. I'm Scott Price. I'm here representing the Alliance for Progressive Virginia. In the last year, we have seen a dramatic rise in discrimination and bigotry across the country, and unfortunately here in Virginia. Passing legislation like this will send a concrete message about where the Commonwealth stands. We support these bills. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Bill Harrison. I'm the Executive Director of Diversity Richmond, the LGBT Community Center here in Central Virginia, and I'm also a gay man. It's against the law to fire someone because they are a Republican. It's against the law to fire someone because they're a Democrat. It's against the law to fire someone because they're Catholic or Baptist. So I ask you, why would it remain legal in Virginia to fire someone because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity? Because being Catholic or Republican is something that you choose. No one chooses their sexual orientations or their gender identities. And if you don't believe that, I ask you, when did you choose yours? You didn't. It was a natural installation of who you are as a human being. And I must tell you, I'm 64 years old, and I've lived in Virginia all of my life. And for years, we had to endure hate-filled legislation against LGBT people introduced by a legislator that by the grace of God, his constituents soundly removed him from office. I had a sigh of relief. And then here we are in 2018, and we're actually debating whether or not it should be legal to fire someone from their job because of who they love. Really?
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Logan Miller, and I'm currently a graduate student at Virginia Commonwealth University, studying for my Master's of Teaching in Secondary Social Studies Education, with the hopes of teaching government. Actually, Speaker Cox was my government teacher, and he inspired me to pursue my career. I'm here today because I am deeply concerned with the issue of discrimination against the LGBT community in terms of housing and public employment in the Commonwealth of Virginia. future teacher, I feel the issue of whom I love being used as grounds for my termination or refused housing to be unfair and unacceptable in a land it claims to be for lovers. I implore you all to vote to pass these bills on to being read before the full committee. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Identify yourself, please.
My name is Caitlin O'Brien. I am a transgender woman from Delegate Yancey's district in Newport News. I have lived there for the last 10 years. I got my degree there. I work at the shipyard as a mechanic the last 5 years. I've been very fortunate compared to other transgender people in the area that I know, which there are many because there's a very high rate of us actually serving in the military, and a lot of those people also end up working in defense after. I've been very fortunate to have a job. I've been very fortunate to have a home. I've known many people who have been homeless because they have not been as fortunate. I have protections where I work. Not everybody does. They should. It's not an issue for anyone other than me, the fact that I am transgender where I work. It was not an issue for them sending me abroad to work in other states. It was not an issue for my company recognizing me when I helped someone having a heart attack in the plant of one of the aircraft carriers that I work on. It should not be a thing that anyone is discriminated against for their gender identity. It doesn't have any effect on whether we can build warships and bombs in Hampton Roads. And it should not be something that is keeping us homeless, keeping us from just basic things as far as being able to live. And I am asking that we do common sense thing. I don't know who's affected negatively by me as a transgender person living next to them. You know, I'm not gonna sue to live in the same house as them. Just want to be able to have an apartment, and anyone and everyone should have the right to live under a roof. I don't know why this is still being debated. This should be a common sense thing. This should already be legislation in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Craig Tolson, Home Builders Association of Virginia. We support the bill. We support housing for all Virginians.
Thanks, sir. Yes, sir.
Chip Hicks on behalf of Virginia Realtors, we likewise support the bills on the housing. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Alita Strickland. I'm from Louisa, Virginia, a nice small rural place right down 64. I'm speaking to you both as a parent and as a professional. As a parent of now an adult gay child, we went through the struggles that many families do. I am also a mental health professional. I'm a licensed school psychologist in private practice and have also worked in schools for 25 years. I'm very well aware of the struggles that our youth go through, and I'm here to ask you as adults who our children look up to make a place for them. If you go to any support group, those kids can tell you that it's legal to discriminate against them. They know that. They're very well aware that they can be fired, that they can't get housing. They know this. They are looking to you as our legislators to make a place for them. Make it illegal to discriminate against them. They want the same things that every child wants. To grow up, get a job, and move out of their parents' house. And as a parent, I can tell you, this is what we all want. We want them to be successful, to get a job and move out. Please don't allow discrimination to continue to be legal. You're not letting them get out of our house. Okay? You're not letting them live their authentic lives. You're not allowing them to live up to their potential. They have so much to contribute to society. Make it a level playing field. And Delegate Peace, to your question earlier, an anecdote that I can share with you is that my child is now an employee of the Department of Defense. As a millennial, they commented to me on how amazing the diversity training was for DOD, and also commented to me on how sad it was that DOD is so far ahead of the Commonwealth of Virginia, a place where we've been born and raised. I hope you all will at least allow these bills out of committee so that the full legislature can act on them. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. As a father of three, I appreciate your comments.
in Glen Ellen. I'm a retired registered nurse. I'm a proud grandmother. I'm straight and cisgender. I've been married to my Navy veteran husband for almost 40 years, and I just can't understand why our friends and neighbors would not be entitled to the same exact civil equal rights protections that my husband and I and our children enjoy. I support these bills, and I hope that the Commonwealth progress.
Thank you. Now, do you guys want to speak in opposition? Two more?
Opposition, no.
It's for, okay, thank you. Just please be brief. I want to give the other folks a chance. So thanks, sir.
Yeah, of course.
William
Luck. I'm a graduate student at the BC Brand Center down here. We do a lot of extensive research with millennials, Gen Z, Gen X. Those are the ones that are coming after the millennials, and if there's any doubt as to whether or not this is a no-brainer in our culture right now, it is. For millennials, Gen Z, Gen X, we all understand that we're inheritors of great injustice and prejudice. We all understand that not all things are equal in this country, but we aspire for them to be equal. And we understand that our friends and neighbors aren't just our friends and neighbors, but they're citizens who would like to participate in our economy, in our government, and there should be no reason why we would not protect them.
Thanks, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Marty Ralph from the Human Rights Campaign. We are America's largest organization fighting to protect America's lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender Americans. And we are here to express our support for protections for Virginia's lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community. As has been stated earlier today, some of this legislation has been passed in many states in this country. There are housing protections currently in 20 states and the District of Columbia, including nearby Maryland and even conservative Utah. In fact, the first non-discrimination bill in our country was passed over 36 years ago. It's time to move on. It's time for Virginia to catch up with the rest of the nation.
Thank you, sir. At this time, we're going to allow folks who are opposed to this legislation an opportunity to speak. Yes, sir. Can you please identify yourself?
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Jeff Caruso with the Virginia Catholic Conference. We're here in opposition to House Bill 401, House Bill 1547, and Senate Bill 423. A fundamental issue here is religious liberty. This bill would apply new categories of sexual orientation and gender identity to housing, contracts, and a vast array of other situations. And by doing so, it could create civil causes of action against faith-based providers based on their sincerely held religious and moral beliefs regarding human sexuality and putting those beliefs into practice. In the housing context, for example, these bills would apply to faith-based colleges that provide housing and also to faith-based charities. I could cite a number of examples within the other contexts as well. Our agencies in our two Catholic dioceses provide vital services in your communities and communities across the state. Just by way of example, Catholic schools, talking about K through 12 as well as colleges and universities, educate over 30,000 students. Catholic charities serve over 80,000 individuals in great need. We cannot sever our beliefs from our services. Our beliefs animate our services. The state's preservation of religious liberty enables us to serve. Please preserve our religious liberty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Caruso.
Virginia Assembly of Independent Baptists, and identify with comments made by Jeff Caruso, but I'd also like to bring up a point, and I know we don't want to discriminate, and I feel like, why should we have to continue to make a laundry list of individuals that we don't want to discriminate against? We can just say we should not discriminate, stop there, and mark everyone else off, because if we keep making a laundry list and we find those get to be preferred over everyone else. Also, since it was mentioned that only 22 states have this in situation, it doesn't seem like there's a majority of states that are in that position, but that's not what rules what we do. But I do still oppose those bills. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And let me see. Please identify yourself. I think I recognize you.
Thank you,
of these bills, 401, 971, 1547. I know one of them's been struck. Senate Bill 202 and 423. The bills basically fall into two types of categories: creating anti-discrimination provisions in housing and in hiring. Some in the public sector, some in the private sector. So I just want to make a general comment against the bills and what we find objectionable about them and why we oppose them. Senator Evans said that most Fortune 500 companies already have policies that protect people in hiring, and that's true. The two largest employers in the Richmond area, Capital One and VCU, not only have very good hiring policies involving these issues, but they also are sponsors of the Equality of Virginia's annual gala, for example. Most of the largest employers in the Richmond area have already decided who they want to hire and what criteria they're going to use. They're already hiring in large measure based on the qualifications and merits of the applicants for the positions, not based on other criteria. The last 5 governors, Republican and Democrat, over the last 16 years, had a policy against considering sexual orientation in the hiring or firing of state employees. If you look at the Virginia Department of Human Resource Management, which tracks allegations of discrimination, between July 1st of 2009 and 2017, they found there were 12 registered complaints based on sexual orientation, amounting to about 2 a year. Upon investigation, not one of those 12 complaints was deemed to be founded. Okay? The realtors that come up here and told you we're against discriminating against anybody based on sexual orientation or gender identity. The Northern Virginia Technology Council said we don't make decisions about who we're hiring and who we're firing based on sexual orientation. The home builders have told you that we think everybody ought to have a home and we don't take this into consideration when we're building homes for them. Okay? So, you know, Delegate Levine said the majority of Virginians have spoken and they've said live and let live. They are living and letting live today. There's no founded evidence that there's any kind of pervasive discrimination either in hiring and firing in the public or private sector or in housing, lending, purchasing of homes, leasing of homes. Delegate Simon said that there's no reports because it's not actionable. Well, that's mostly true, but not entirely true. There are 3 localities in the Commonwealth of Virginia who have added sexual orientation to their Human Rights Acts, and since 2010, there have been 19 claims filed or grievances filed based on discrimination in housing based on sexual orientation. All 19 were investigated by those. One of those is in Hampton Roads, and they were found to be unfounded. So there is some evidence that there are areas where the local human rights councils have already added sexual orientation to their human rights statutes, and they don't see a pervasive problem with this. Okay, this isn't really about who gets hired and who gets fired, who gets to buy and who gets to lease a house. What this is about is who may sue. And when you add these people, when you add a new protected class on there, onto this list of protected classes in the Fair Housing Act and in these Employment Acts, non-discrimination acts, what you're doing is you're creating causes of action, right? And let's look at the definition. I don't think Delegate Levine defined sexual orientation, but the other bills before you had 2 novel definitions inserted into the Code of Virginia that appear nowhere else. The definition of sexual orientation is the actual or perceived heterosexuality, homosexuality, or bisexuality of an individual. Under that criteria, actual or perceived, you have now such an expansive and subjective protected category that every single person in this room right now would probably qualify as a protected person under these acts. And you might say, well, that's great. But in practice, this is about now what happens when I call, say, down into Delegate Miari's district, and he's got a constituent that owns 4 beach houses. And I call him the week before the 4th of July weekend, and I say, I want to rent your beach house on the 4th of July. And Delegate Miari's doesn't call me. Delegate Miari's constituent.
I don't own 4 beach houses.
Right. Delegate Miari's constituent, who owns 4 beach houses, doesn't return my phone call. That's potentially a grievance that is grievable because he didn't call me back. He obviously didn't call me back either because of my perceived or actual heterosexuality, homosexuality, or bisexuality, I'm off to Brad Maher's office to get me a lawyer, okay, to lawyer up and sue his constituents. This isn't just about religious housing. This isn't just about compelling Regent University, which has married housing for its students, or Christendom College up in Winchester, who has married housing for their students, or Liberty University has married housing for their students in Lynchburg. It's not just about compelling them to violate their deeply held religious convictions and provide housing to people that are same-sex couples, for example. This is about private sector owners and homeowners and lenders and leasers. Now, Senator Wexton said there's a religious exemption, but if you look at the language of the religious exemption, it provides no relief to these folks, because what it says is you can have an exemption to only rent or lease to people who are the same religion as you, but you can't discriminate against people based on any of the other criteria that are already listed and which they want to add, which is sexual orientation and also gender identity. These are subjective criteria. They're not patent they're not patent criteria. And so what you're doing now is you're opening the doors to all sorts of grievances and complaints because someone perceives the reason why they didn't get the job, or they didn't get the promotion, or they didn't get the house they wanted, or they weren't able to lease the beach house that they wanted. Not just religious employers, not just religious, landlords, but every Virginian who feels as if they didn't get the job they wanted, or they didn't get the promotion they wanted, or they were part of the layoff, and they perceive that their supervisor, their boss, or the decision maker that didn't hire them, or fired them, or didn't lease the property to them, made that decision based on their actual or perceived sexuality. For these reasons, and for all the reasons about religious liberty that were previously articulated by Jeff Caruso, we oppose the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Janice. Just a moment, I tell you right. This time we're going to go ahead and just take up the bills, one by one.
Before you do this, Mr. Chairman, may I respond briefly to what
Excuse me, Delegate Dwayne. Delegate Wright, could you just wait, please, just 1 minute?
I'd like to just very briefly respond to what
Delegate, we're going to take your bill up first, so just go ahead with your final comments.
Okay, so here are my final comments. Former Delegate Janice, it seems like he kind of wants it both ways. He says that these laws, when they exist, are almost never being used, and they're also going to cause oblivion in all these lawsuits. Those facts can't both be true. We heard the young man talk about the fact that 44%, and these are blind studies. They send two couples in, 44% they find discrimination. So these are real examples. And I just want to give something from my personal experience briefly. I worked in Congress 15 years ago for a member of Congress. At that time they had Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I had several women, actually at least 3 that I can remember, call in and tell me that they had to submit to the sexual advances of their superior, and if they did not, they would be outed as a lesbian and fired. We had to tell these 3 women there was nothing we could do for them. They didn't want to go for blackmail. They didn't want to accuse them of rape because they could lose this long history. Some of them had worked in defense for many, many years. These laws serve as a prophylactics. What they do is when they pass, people often don't discriminate, and that's a good thing. And lastly, just very quickly, from my own personal experience, in the 1990s, I was a lawyer, young and up-and-coming lawyer. I had a great boss, still a good man, a Republican, actually. I like to think that he very much taught me how to be a lawyer and how to write. I very much respected that man, I still do. In the 1990s, I had a boyfriend, and I learned in one terrible weekend that he was HIV positive and dying of AIDS and had about 3 months to live. It was a very, very hard weekend for me. It was also hard for me because I wasn't out at my job. And I was really afraid to tell my employer that, hey, I'm gay, and I gotta take care of my boyfriend, I need some time off. And I knew he was a big Republican, I knew I might lose my job. And I had to weigh it, and I finally decided it was more important to me to take care of my loved one and risk my job. Now, I came out that next Monday, and to my overwhelming relief, my boss said, Mark, you're a good lawyer, we don't want to lose you, take what time you need. Like I said, he was a good man. I didn't know that would happen. And this fear, even when, I'll wrap it up, this fear exists. And one of the things that these laws do is they let people not live in fear. And so I would urge you to pass it. Thank you.
Delegate Wright, because repeat the motion, sir.
Yes, I make the motion that we lay House Bill 401 on table.
The motion has been made and been seconded. See, the motion is not debatable. It's, members should prepare to cast a vote on the electronic voting machines.
No, not for that. That's what they do.
Mr. Chairman.
Mine's not up.
Close the voting.
Mine's not up, Mr. Chair. Mine's is a no, but it's not up for me to vote.
Everybody's voted and close the roll. Motion to lay on the table is passed 5-2.
Take your time.
Thank you. Let me see, I believe.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Evans up this bill. Chair recognizes Delegate McGarris.
May I have a final word, sir? Before you make a motion.
Senator Evans, you have the floor.
Yeah, very briefly. You know, we heard from Mr. Janus talking about how there's, in his world, there's no discrimination at all. I'd like him to visit my world and the world of some of the people standing behind me. When I was an employee after college at one job, I was walking with my boss, and he said, "Isn't it great we have no fags working here?" So would I want to come out there? Would I want to see if there was discrimination? Would I want to see if I got fired? I don't think so. And I would just say, imagine you all in your place of business, afraid to display the picture of your lawfully wedded wives or husbands. Imagine that. You're afraid to display their picture. You're afraid to say where you went on vacation. You're afraid to say what you did over the weekend. Most people aren't afraid of that now, but let's make our state employees aware of that. And also, Mr. Janus mentioned Capital One and VCU having these great policies, which we are very proud of in Virginia. And we know that they're smart and support non-discrimination policies. But when people come to Virginia and they move here, those forward-thinking companies, some of them have partners or husbands or wives who would also like to work for a business. And as one of the larger, if not the largest employer, the Commonwealth of Virginia, they'd like to know that they can work here with insurance too, not at the whim of who's governor.
Thanks, Senator Evans. Doug McGarris.
I commend everybody that came here. And I think at the end of the day, the debate that we're having is two great values that really define who we are as Americans. On one hand, there is this deep desire, at least the way I was raised, that you're to treat everybody with dignity and respect. And I think there is this overwhelming desire. I think fundamentally we are a good and decent country, if not a noble one. There is a desire to treat everybody with dignity and respect. There's also a desire to protect freedom of conscience, freedom of religion. So how do we balance that? Now, Winston Churchill once said that Americans always do the right thing after they've exhausted every other possibility. And I think we both have noble goals here. I joke that I'm part of the Leave Us Alone coalition. You live your life the way you see fit, and the dictates of your conscience and your God, and let me live my life as I see fit, to the dictates of my conscience and my God. I think part of my concern about some of these bills that I saw, and I read every bill, and I'm also in the Courts of Justice Committee, and we like to joke that we don't vote on ideas, we vote on the law. And we also realize that there will be a judge somewhere in Lynchburg or Galax or whatever that's going to be trying to interpret what we pass as a body. And they're not going to have the benefit of the testimony of the patrons and other individuals and the witnesses that were here today. And so the deep concern that I have is that, particularly 36-96.2, the changes there would force private religious institutions, Liberty University, and Region, that have very strict policies that dictate to their conscience. So strict that they do not allow non-married heterosexual couples to live together. Now, for a lot of people in this room, we may think that's antiquated, we may think that's living behind the times. But at the end of the day, we live in a society that recognizes I may disagree with your religious beliefs, I may think they're outdated or antiquated. but you absolutely have that protection under the law to live your life to the dictates of your conscience. And so I would love to get to yes on some of these until I see a proper exemption that would give to these religious institutions. That's why I had to vote no. And so I'd like to at some point get to a bill that we all can agree on, and maybe at some point we can. But that, I think, is those two competing values that I think that we're trying to balance. And we're still trying to figure it out. But listen, the stories and the testimony today in many ways was heartbreaking. And I commend everybody for taking the time to come and speak to the committee. We're better for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Leons. She's the chairman now, Delegate Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to respond. I think that in some of our institutions, don't they have a code of conduct where this law would not apply?
I don't know. I never attended either one of those schools, so I don't know.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Mieres, I actually have a copy of the Liberty Way, which is their rules for student conduct, and sexual relations outside of a biblically ordained marriage between a natural-born man and a natural-born woman are not permissible at Liberty University. Activities outside of these standards and guidelines are violations of the Student Honor Code. So I'd be interested to see what they do with their same-sex couple marriage, with their same-sex couple students now, because it appears either they're not being admitted or they're being expelled.
Thank you, Senator. Delegate Wright.
Mr. Chair, I move that Senate Bill 202 be laid on the table.
The motion's been made and the bill is seconded. The motion's not to table, so members should prepare to vote on the electronic voting machine. Close the roll. The motion laid on the table passes by a vote of 5-2.
I'd like to thank the committee for their hearing. I'd like to also thank Delegate Mieres for your desire to get to yes, and look forward to working with you with the interim.
Thank you, Senator. Delegate Simon.
Mr. Chairman, I have to elongate, so I'm going to make 2 quick points. One is to this issue that by having the this perceived sexual orientation, we're opening up this world of all kinds of lawsuits. You know, we already have on line 60 of my bill, or line 61, that we protect people with handicap. The definition of handicap, it's being handicapped or being regarded as having such an impairment. Okay, so we've got that already in the law, so that's a red herring. That's not, in fact, anything you ought to be concerned about when it comes to sexual orientation discrimination. And this issue of sincerely held religious beliefs. In the 1960s, prior to Logan versus Virginia, in fact, in the opinion in Virginia that upheld miscegenation, we heard that there are people with a sincerely held religious belief that races ought to stay on the continents where they were born and not be together and mix. And that was a sincerely held religious belief. There are certain sincerely held religious beliefs which are so discriminatory that we don't give them the protection of the law, and this is one of those cases, and I hope that we have the pleasure of the committee to please pass this bill.
Thank you, Senator. Delegate Carr.
I'm moving to report. Second.
Substitute motion, Mr. Chairman.
We have a substitute motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to leave House Bill 1547 on the table.
Motion made to lay on the table is seconded. Again, which is not debatable. The members should prepare to vote on the electronic voting machine. Close the roll. The motion lay on the table is passed by a vote of 5-2. And I believe last up was Senator Braxton. Bill 423.
Chairman, I know that these arguments have been made. It's really not that long ago that we were a commonwealth where we would have red lines in redlining in our communities, restricted covenants in our deeds, and this is, if we have an opportunity to protect these folks, we really should take the opportunity to do it.
Mr. Chair.
Chair recognizes
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I just want to speak to it, even though some of the bills have been laid on the table, but I want to speak to the issue. You know, I've sit there and I've listened year after year to this. Matter of fact, I even at some point presented a bill. And in many ways, I am just so sad about the fact that we've not gotten any further than this in this Commonwealth and in many ways in our society. You know, and I've said it before, so some of you who are here have heard this statement before, that I've been discriminated, against. It's been a double discrimination. I'm an African American and I am a woman. And it seems like these systems of hierarchy that have been established over the years does a disservice to us as a Commonwealth. And we must get beyond this. No matter how we feel about people's lives or what they're doing, there must be efforts made to dismantle, again, these systems of hierarchy that says, you're not good, I choose you because you're better. I mean, we have an obligation as leaders to set the standards. We have an obligation to be giants in this and to support anytime anyone is being discriminated against for any reason. And I really mean that. There are, when we sat here, you raised the question, I can't help from thinking, would these be my colleagues? Would you all, if it was the enslaved Africans coming, or would it have been okay? Because there were lawmakers that said, yes, we are going to enslave you and we're going to continue to allow it to happen for 4 years. If you were African American and went beyond the time during slavery, would you then be discriminated against because you were black and they could recognize the fact that there was a different color of your skin? Women have always been discriminated against. And it is time for us to take a lead in dismantling, again, these systems of hierarchy. It is people, regardless of their sexual orientation, regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of their gender, must be treated with dignity. They must be treated with respect in an honorable way. And we must be leaders in cultivating the right spirit in terms of how people are treated. And so to continue to say no, when we know that people are being treated. And Bill, Janice, I love Bill, but Bill, as a white man, sometimes I wonder in America if you really know what discrimination is. And I'm not doing this because I want to be on a television screen. I am doing it because I know how it feels. My dad was discriminated as an African American for years working a job. For years. And when he retired after 40 years, he couldn't even get a retirement enough to take care of him and my mother. And so it doesn't feel good. And when it doesn't feel good for me as a woman, and many, many times I've been discriminated against as a woman, but as an African American, much more, then I know it doesn't feel good to one of them, to individuals who have, because of their sexual orientation. And we must stand up and do something about it.
Thank you, Delegate.
Mr.
Chairman, I have a motion. I move we lay Senate Bill 423 on second.
We have a motion which has been seconded. Again, the lay on table is not clear. The members will cast their vote on the electronic voting machine. Close the roll. The motion lay on the table is passed by a vote of 5-2. That completes the docket of subcommittee number 1. The subcommittee adjourns. The members will rise.
Shame on you.
Shame on you.
Shame!
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 2019's around the corner. You're gone.
Shame on you. We're watching.
2019's around the corner. Say goodbye.
No religion.
Why do we care about your religious beliefs? This is state. Separation of church and state.
You are on.
Shame on you.
Can't vote.
I'm here for the next meeting.
What? Yeah, so they struck out.